911, what's your emergency? My daughter's been missing for the last 31 days.
Including why it took a month to report Caylee's disappearance and what happened on the last day she saw her daughter.
The only person in this world that matters to me still is my daughter. But I'm still defending the fact that I didn't hurt her.
On July 15th, 2008, Caylee Anthony dialed 911, her voice trembling with fear and frustration, confessing the horrifying truth she had just unearthed. Her granddaughter, 2-year-old Caylee Anthony, had been missing for an entire month. Cindy's words, sharp and panicked, would soon echo in courtrooms, television screens, and the hearts of millions. It smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car.
There's something wrong. I found my daughter's car today, and it smells like there's been a dead body in the car.
Caylee Anthony, Caylee's 22-year-old mother, had not reported her daughter missing. Instead, she had spent the last month partying, posting carefree photos on social media, and getting a tattoo that read Bella Vita, the beautiful life. The stark contrast between her lifestyle and her daughter's disappearance shook the nation to its core. On July 16, 2008, Caylee was arrested, and what followed was an unraveling of lies and inconsistencies that would raise questions far beyond Caylee's tragic fate. As investigators began piecing together the events of the last month, they discovered something chilling. According to Cindy's testimony, her daughter had spun a web of lies about Caylee's whereabouts. Caylee claimed Caylee was with a babysitter, Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, known simply as Zanny the nanny, yet this babysitter was a figment of Caylee's imagination. Detectives found no evidence of Zenaida's existence, and when Caylee took them to her supposed apartment, they discovered an empty, unfamiliar space. The deeper authorities dug, the more Caylee's story unraveled. Her actions in the month after Caylee's disappearance became the fuel for a firestorm of public outrage. The internet searches on Caylee's computer would only deepen the suspicions. Investigators discovered searches for terms like chloroform, neck breaking, and various household items that could be used as weapons. And there were traces of chloroform, along with the smell of decomposition detected in the trunk of her car. A forensic analysis even linked traces of hair found in the trunk to little Caylee, making it clear that something horrific had happened. As America watched, prosecutors charged Caylee with first-degree murder on October 14, 2008. This was more than just a murder trial. It was a courtroom drama that captivated and horrified millions, turning the loss of a child into an unsolved mystery, a media circus, and a public obsession. Yet behind the sensationalism lay an unresolved pain, a family broken by the gaping void left by Caylee. The accusations flung between family members and the web of lies Caylee spun became emblematic of a deeper dysfunction within the Anthony household. Even as they sought justice for Caylee, the Anthonys were being torn apart by hidden betrayals, unspoken traumas, and simmering resentments. Even more perplexing was the discovery of Caylee's skeletal remains. On December 11, 2008, a utility worker stumbled upon the child's remains in a wooded area less than a mile from the Anthony family home. Caylee's bones were found wrapped in a blanket inside a laundry bag. Duct tape lay near her skull, hinting at the grim possibility that she had been suffocated. Among the haunting evidence was a Winnie the Pooh blanket, identical to one owned by the Anthonys. The prosecution faced an uphill battle. They had no witnesses, no direct evidence, and were dealing with a mother whose every word seemed laden with contradictions. Caylee had often changed her story, and her web of lies only further confused the case. Investigators struggled to make sense of the 31 days of silence, the nights out, the tattoo, and Caylee's seemingly indifferent demeanor. One crucial piece of evidence was the forensic analysis of Caylee's car. When police examined the trunk, they detected traces of chloroform, a substance that could be used to render someone unconscious. The prosecution presented this as a possible tool Caylee had used to subdue Caylee. Then there was the matter of the stench, the unmistakable smell of human decomposition, which lingered in the car. Forensic expert Dr. Arpad Vast testified about air samples from the trunk, claiming that they revealed the presence of volatile compounds consistent with human decomposition. As the jury listened to witness after witness, the image of Caylee that emerged was one marred by both inconsistency and deceit. The prosecution called upon her friends, former boyfriends, and even her parents to testify to her actions and behaviors. Her mother, Cindy, struggled to reconcile the daughter she loved with the woman standing trial for the murder of her grandchild. Cindy's voice cracked as she recalled those agonizing weeks without Caylee, and George, too, broke down on the stand, sobbing under the weight of the allegations against him. Body language experts dissected every nuance of Casey's reactions in court, noting moments of irritation, smugness, and defiance. Some saw this as evidence of a manipulative personality, one capable of hiding her darkest secrets behind a veil of lies. Others argued that Casey's demeanor was typical of someone enduring unimaginable stress, her composure a thin mask over a soul in turmoil. Public opinion, however, was less forgiving. Outside the courtroom, crowds gathered in protest, carrying signs that branded Caylee as a monster, a liar, and a murderer. The media frenzy had turned Caylee's death into a spectacle, and everyone seemed to have an opinion on Casey's guilt or innocence. News channels broadcasted every detail, from Casey's tattoos to her clubbing photos, as symbols of her character. But as the investigation went on, a sobering reality became apparent. No one, not even the investigators, truly knew what had happened to Caylee. When the trial opened in 2011, defense attorney Jose Baez shocked the court by revealing a new narrative: Caylee had accidentally drowned in the family pool. He claimed that Casey's father, George Anthony, had found Caylee's lifeless body and had helped Caylee conceal the death. The defense didn't stop there. Baez alleged that George had sexually abused Caylee, beginning in her early childhood. This, Baez argued, was why Caylee had developed a disturbing pattern of lying, a survival mechanism forged in the trauma of familial betrayal. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution intensified its efforts to build a case against Caylee. Prosecutor Jeff Ashton called on a string of forensic experts to piece together a theory of premeditated murder. One key figure was Dr. Arpad Vass, a forensic anthropologist known for his expertise in the scent of death. Dr. Vass testified that air samples from Caylee's car trunk showed signs of human decomposition, a point the prosecution believed critical to demonstrating that Caylee had been transported in Caylee's vehicle after her death. Ashton presented this analysis alongside internet searches from the Anthony family computer that included terms like how to make chloroform and neck breaking. To the prosecution, these searches, along with high levels of chloroform detected in the car, suggested that Caylee had not only planned Caylee's murder, but had experimented with methods to render her unconscious. They argued that Caylee had suffocated her daughter with chloroform and duct tape, driven her body around in her car trunk, and ultimately disposed of her in a nearby wooded area. But the defense, led by Jose Baez, fought back with a counter-narrative that shook the foundation of the prosecution's theory. Baez questioned the reliability of the forensic science behind Dr. Vass's analysis. He argued that this air sampling technology was relatively new and speculative, suggesting that the high levels of chloroform could have come from household cleaning supplies or trash left in the car. He also pointed to the possibility of environmental contamination in the trunk and challenged the notion that the chloroform traces definitively indicated Caylee's body had been there. The defense's strategy continued to hinge on a completely different interpretation of Caylee's death. Baez put forth his theory that Caylee had accidentally drowned in the Anthony family pool, a theory he supported with testimonies describing how the pool ladder had been left accessible on the day Caylee went missing. He argued that George Anthony had discovered Caylee's body and, fearing scandal, had forced Caylee to conceal the truth. Baez argued that George's abuse was the root cause of Caylee's pattern of lying and emotional detachment, claiming that George's alleged manipulation had conditioned Caylee to act as though nothing was wrong. Throughout this emotional testimony, Caylee remained impassive, her demeanor still a puzzle to many watching both in and outside the courtroom. The public and media's fascination with the case reached a new peak when Cindy Anthony, Caylee's mother, took the stand. Cindy's testimony was emotional and conflicted. She recounted memories of her beloved granddaughter and the shock of her disappearance. Yet, in a move that seemed almost protective of her daughter, Cindy claimed that she had conducted the incriminating searches on the family computer. She testified that she had searched for chloroform in relation to chlorophyll related to her dog's health. This testimony directly contradicted the prosecution's argument that Casey had made those searches to research methods of incapacitating her daughter, injecting more confusion into the case. The defense continued its attempt to dismantle the prosecution's forensic evidence. They called Dr. Werner Spitz, a renowned forensic pathologist, who argued that the duct tape found near Caylee's skull had been placed post-mortem, suggesting that it was not the cause of her death. Dr. Spitz stated that due to the advanced decomposition, he could not determine the exact cause of death and criticized the autopsy process. This cast further doubt on the prosecution's theory, suggesting that Caylee's death could have been accidental. Another piece of evidence that captivated both the court and the public was the smell of decomposition in the trunk. A cadaver dog had alerted to the scent in Casey's car, a detail that the prosecution argued indicated Caylee's body had been there. Yet, Baez and the defense argued that the dog's alert was not reliable proof of Caylee's presence, pointing to the possibility of trash or other organic materials causing the scent. This debate became a battle of experts, as both sides sought to use forensic science to support their narratives. The defense's strategy leaned heavily on creating reasonable doubt. Without concrete evidence tying Casey to the murder, Baez argued the prosecution had failed to prove her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. He systematically chipped away at each piece of the prosecution's case, framing it as circumstantial and unreliable. When it came to the smell of decomposition, Baez suggested that the odor could have come from a bag of trash left in the trunk. He contended that the air sample analysis, though groundbreaking, was far from foolproof. As George Anthony's role grew more complicated, Baez repeatedly returned to George's alleged role in covering up Caylee's death, painting him as a man so desperate to protect his family's reputation that he would manipulate his daughter into silence. On the stand, George tearfully denied any wrongdoing, asserting that he had always loved his granddaughter and was devastated by her loss. But his denial seemed to clash with his emotional breakdowns, and Baez seized on this, suggesting that George's tears might be the tears of a man harboring guilt, not just grief. After 6 weeks of intense testimony and cross-examination, both sides prepared for their closing arguments. In a highly charged address, Jeff Ashton reminded the jury of Casey's suspicious behavior after Caylee's disappearance, her partying, the Bella Vita tattoo, and her lies to friends and family. Ashton urged the jury to reject the defense's portrayal of Casey as a victim, arguing that her actions were cold, calculated, and designed to eliminate her parental responsibilities. He contended that the evidence, although circumstantial, created a pattern of behavior that pointed to only one conclusion: Caylee Anthony was guilty of murdering her daughter. But Jose Baez's closing arguments were just as powerful. He focused on the inconsistencies in the prosecution's narrative and highlighted the lack of direct evidence tying Casey to Caylee's death. Baez emphasized that the state had failed to prove Casey's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, calling the case a fantasy built on speculation rather than facts. He reminded the jury that the defense didn't need to prove Casey's innocence only to show that the prosecution's case left room for doubt. Baez implored the jury to see Casey as a woman who had suffered abuse and manipulation, and who had been led into a series of tragic decisions by forces beyond her control. When the jury retired to deliberate, the weight of the case and the stakes of their decision were undeniable. Inside the courthouse, tension was palpable as the public awaited a verdict. Outside, crowds of protesters gathered, some calling for justice for Caylee and others urging the court to consider Casey's potential victimhood. News channels provided non-stop coverage, and social media platforms buzzed with debates, theories, and speculation. For many, this trial had transcended the details of the evidence and had become a battle over questions of family loyalty, parental responsibility, and the dark complexities of human behavior. After 10 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict that stunned the nation. Caylee Anthony was found not guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated manslaughter, and aggravated child abuse.
As to the charge of first-degree murder, verdict as to count 1, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. As to the charge of aggravated child abuse, verdict as to count 2, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. as to the charge of aggravated manslaughter of a child. Verdict is to count 3. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty.
She was convicted only on 4 counts of providing false information to law enforcement. The courtroom gasped, and outside, cries of outrage erupted from the crowd. Many believed Casey's acquittal was a miscarriage of justice, a failure to find accountability for Caylee's tragic death. The public's reaction was swift and visceral, as people struggled to understand how the evidence presented could lead to an acquittal. Following her acquittal, Casey's life became one of secrecy and controversy. The media continued to follow her movements, and public opinion largely condemned her as a guilty woman who had slipped through the cracks of the legal system. Meanwhile, the Anthony family remained fractured, with George and Cindy Anthony living under a shadow of suspicion, and Casey facing a lifetime of public scrutiny and disdain. The Caylee Anthony trial remains a case study in the complexity of justice, the limits of forensic science, and the profound impacts of trauma and dysfunction. Even today, people continue to debate the details, and Caylee Marie Anthony's story lingers as a reminder of a lost child who never got to grow up. The truth of what happened that summer day in 2008 may never be fully known, but the questions her death raised will likely endure for generations. The jury's verdict in Caylee Marie Anthony's trial sent shockwaves across the country. When she was declared not guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated manslaughter, and aggravated child abuse, the public's outrage was palpable. People who had followed every detail of the trial were devastated, and many felt justice for Caylee Marie Anthony had been denied. For a nation that had watched a little girl's tragedy become a public spectacle, the outcome felt like an open wound that might never fully heal. With Casey acquitted, she faced the world as a free woman, but her future was anything but clear. She emerged from the courthouse to protests and demonstrations, her face hidden behind sunglasses, her expression unreadable. Although legally exonerated, Casey had been convicted in the court of public opinion. The media that had scrutinized her every move was relentless, and she became the subject of continuous backlash, her life under a microscope as she tried to navigate her new reality. For her part, Casey maintained her innocence. She insisted that she had no role in Caylee's death and claimed that the events that had unfolded were beyond her control. In 2017, she broke her silence in a controversial interview, admitting, "I don't give a s about what anyone thinks about me, I never will." In the interview, Casey appeared defiant, expressing frustration over the public's portrayal of her and the endless speculations surrounding her case. She continued to claim that she had been a loving mother and dismissed those who questioned her innocence. Despite her attempts to move on, Casey struggled to reintegrate into society. Her relationships with her family, particularly with her parents, Cindy and George Anthony, remained strained. George had denied the allegations of abuse and manipulation, and his marriage to Cindy suffered from the lingering bitterness of the trial. Cindy, however, continued to support her daughter on some level, still harboring doubts about what had truly happened to Caylee. Their fractured family dynamics became symbolic of the larger tragedy, a family bound by love but torn apart by mistrust and accusations. Seeking to rebuild her life, Casey reportedly started a photography business, but her notoriety made it difficult to establish any semblance of normalcy. In 2020, she attempted to launch a private investigation firm, allegedly motivated by a desire to help others who were wrongfully accused. However, this move was met with widespread skepticism, as people questioned whether she was truly capable of empathy and trustworthiness given the unresolved mysteries surrounding her daughter's death. The mystery around Caylee's death persisted, especially after Casey's 2022 appearance in the docuseries Caylee Anthony, Where the Truth Lies. In it, Casey gave her first on-camera interview since her trial, claiming to finally reveal what had happened the day Caylee died. Her account shifted once again, as she reiterated that her father, George Anthony, had been involved, accusing him of staging Caylee's drowning to cover up his alleged abuse of her granddaughter. Casey alleged that she believed Caylee had been alive for the 31 days she was missing, and that she had been following George's instructions. She recounted seeing her father holding Caylee's lifeless body, accusing her and telling her, "This is your fault," before walking away with Caylee.
In the series, Casey says, she was soaking wet. I can see him standing there with her in his arms and hand her to me and telling me that it's my fault, that I did that I caused that. But he didn't rush to call 911 and he wasn't trying to resuscitate her. For 31 days, Anthony says she thought her daughter was alive and well.
The docuseries reignited public interest in the case and sparked widespread debate. George Anthony denied the new allegations, calling them outrageous and appalling and expressing frustration at being blamed again for his granddaughter's death. He emphasized that he had always loved Caylee and found Casey's accusations both hurtful and absurd. Body language and behavioral experts were invited on various media platforms to dissect Casey's demeanor and emotional responses during the interview. Analysts noted her expressions of anger and disgust, suggesting these emotions might indicate deception or unresolved feelings toward her father. Casey's critics saw the docuseries as an attempt to shift blame and continue a pattern of deflecting responsibility, while her supporters argued it was her effort to speak her truth after years of silence. Yet, despite all the allegations, theories, and finger-pointing, no new evidence emerged to clarify what had truly happened to Caylee. George and Cindy Anthony continued to live with the burden of doubt and public scrutiny, and their grief for Caylee endured. In the years following the trial, George made several media appearances, in which he expressed a desire to forgive his daughter and mend their fractured relationship. He spoke of his longing for closure, stating that he hoped one day the full truth would be revealed, allowing both him and Cindy some peace. Casey's life after the trial continued to be marked by isolation and controversy. She remained a figure of intrigue and suspicion, her face instantly recognizable, her name synonymous with the tragic loss of a child. She had few close friends, and the public's disdain only deepened over the years. Her attempts to move forward were continually met with resistance, and her story became a cautionary tale about the impact of public perception on individuals accused of serious crimes, regardless of a court's verdict. In many ways, Caylee's case highlighted the complexities and challenges within the justice system, particularly in high-profile cases. The trial underscored the limits of forensic science, the difficulty of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and the challenges faced by jurors when presented with circumstantial evidence. Some legal experts argued that the case exemplified the risks of media-driven narratives, where public opinion can influence perceptions of guilt or innocence. Others saw the case as a failure of the legal system to bring justice for a defenseless child whose life was tragically cut short. The legacy of the Caylee Anthony case continues to spark discussions about parental responsibility, mental health, trauma, and the lasting impacts of familial dysfunction. Caylee's death remains a symbol of a system unable to answer the public's most pressing questions: what had truly happened to Caylee? Was her death accidental or deliberate? And could anyone have prevented it? For the Anthony family, the aftermath of the trial left deep scars that may never heal. While Cindy and George continued to mourn their granddaughter and faced lingering doubts about Casey's innocence, Caylee herself lives with the weight of public disdain, her name forever linked to one of the most controversial murder trials in American history. As the years pass, the memory of Caylee Marie Anthony endures. She is remembered by those who followed the case as a bright-eyed little girl whose life was stolen too soon. Her story serves as both a reminder of the fragility of life and a sobering reflection on the darkness that sometimes lurks within families. And while the world may never fully understand the truth of what happened to Caylee, her short life and tragic death have left an indelible mark, a reminder of the mysteries that can lie at the heart of even the most ordinary families.